well over 100 people. So again, please just be patient with us as we go forward. The other thing that I'd like to mention is that the Zoom meeting will be recorded, and we're going to make an attempt. We are going to record it and try to post it online so that people that can't be here tonight can go ahead and access it a little bit later on at their own kind of leisure, I guess is the way I would say that. So again, Diane already mentioned about the microphones, but also depending on the strength of your Wi-Fi connection and who's on or not on at your house, sometimes if you turn off your video, it can help the stability of the platform. As you're listening to these presentations, you don't want it to freeze up, but that is one thing that you can do to simplify things if you need to. The agenda for tonight is a very simple one to start. We're trying to start small. It's small, but it's also kind of important as we move forward. We did send out a parent survey earlier in the month of July, and what we are looking to do is to share the results of that survey and help you see that we are using it to kind of make decisions moving forward as to what reopening of the Maranacook school system will look like in the fall, and that's coming up very shortly. So we will review the parent data. We will also have some short, brief reports about the work that the committees have been doing, and I'll let them speak to that when we get there. And then we did develop, based on the opportunity in the survey to submit questions, as well as a link that I posted yesterday. We did develop some kind of frequently asked questions as a place to start going forward. So we will address those at the end of the program as well. So that is kind of where we are at this point. So I am going to attempt to share my screen so that we can take a look at the parent survey, and I'll walk you through that to start our presentation. So we're going to see if this works. So Diane, right now I'm getting a message saying host disabled, attendee screen sharing. She's going to let me know when we're ready to start. I apologize. Thank you everyone for your patience with this as we work through the kinks. Okay, it looks like we're ready to go. So here we go. Hopefully everyone can see a screen. I'm going to actually scroll up a little bit. So this is a live version of the parent survey that we did. You'll notice that we got an amazing response with this of 730 responses. And what we're going to do as we scroll through is we are going to look at some of the visuals that Google Docs kind of displays with the data and the types of questions we asked. There is a component, and I'll point it out when we get there. The comments kind of come together as one, and you have to scroll through the comment screen. We're not going to go through all the comments because, as you can see, there are 730 responses, and there are several spots where we got 730 responses or comments. So what we'll do is try to just give you a flavor of what those responses look like and sounded like, or where they were leaning. So having said that, we'll start right up here at the top. So the first several questions we asked were for demographics, so that we could kind of get a read on who was responding at our surveys. So again, if you look, our high school has the greatest number of students. We had the greatest number of responses. Middle school, second greatest number of students, second greatest responses, and then kind of on down the line. Reedfield Elementary is our biggest elementary school, followed by Manchester, then Mount Vernon, and our smallest school out of all of our schools is Wayne. So for the most part, things kind of lined up as far as responses go, and I feel like personally it gives us a good indication of where people are. We have a little over 1,100 total students. So again, knowing that we had 730 responses, I feel like we got a really good response rate for this. So again, another demographic question about the grade levels. And again, it broke down kind of as expected in terms of the number of students we have at those particular grade levels. And then the number of students attending RSU 38. Again, the number of students per family that were attending, you can see the breakdown there. It seems like a lot of our families are in the 1 and 2 range, at least at this point, but we do know we have larger families out there, and that is kind of reflected in the survey as well. We did ask a question about technology devices that were used in the emergency closure that we had beginning in March. And again, this also kind of breaks down the way we expected. Students in grades 6 through 12 had individual devices. They all had laptops. So seeing that our greatest use was a school issued device made a lot of sense. The next one, the next greatest usage is a home provided device. And again, knowing that we did not, at that time, we were not able to provide devices to all elementary students, knowing that elementary students were taking advantage of some online programs. Again, this kind of makes sense that parents, especially at the elementary level, were probably helping to supplies those devices. So some sort of home device or tablet. And then as a lot of us already know, cell phones play a huge part in our world right now. So it also was not surprising that cell phones came out right at the top there. Also, we noticed that there was about 25 responses saying they did not have a device, and that is very helpful to us moving forward to help to identify who those families are so that we can look at getting devices and or connectivity into their hands as we start the fall and as we go into the school year. So there were several comments about devices and how families really worked hard to make sure if their child needed to be online and or access online learning, that they were able to do that. So there was, those responses were very consistent, and it shows the support of the communities that we have. The next question down asked about reliability of internet or Wi-Fi at home. And based on what you can see there, about 85% of our respondents said that it was reliable and consistent. However, if you dig down into the comments below it, one of the things that was very evident in that was that there was strains on home family networks because of parents that were working from home or had multiple children and or adults online at the same time. So it did come out to be 85% reliable and consistently available, but comments indicated that there was issues in homes at various times due to the volume and the amount of time and the amount of people that were using the internet. So that did show up as well in the comments that were there. We did ask about food service because that was really important to us moving forward, is to know what the food service was about. 86% did not use the meal program. However, that leaves about 14 that said they used it either regularly or a few times. And we know we only had a couple of locations where we were able to provide food or serve food, I should say. So we do know that that may be skewed a little bit in terms of people being able to access because of the timing and such. But it also kind of reflects when we look at the number of meals that were served, this number kind of, these percentages kind of align with the number of meals that were served going across. And then the next question was about instruction in the fall, and just a general question about are you planning on sending your children back to school? So the blue says yes, absolutely, at about 32%. 48% said yes, it was likely, but you would need to know the district plans And we will be getting to that. I'll talk about that a little bit more at the end of the presentation about where we are and when we will be presenting to the board. But I took that as a good sign to see that we were somewhere close to 80% of people were really looking at the possibility of, the very real possibility of coming back to in-person instruction. So again, that was a very positive thing, and we were glad to see that. The other thing that is noticeable for us, and we still have to figure this out, but we did put the option up there, and that's the one that's in purple that said, no, we're not planning on coming back to in-person instruction, but if the school system can get an enhanced plan together, that they would be interested in still continuing with instruction. However, they wouldn't be coming in. And that's almost 12% of the respondents. So that is something that we know. We understand that there's going to be a chunk of people out there that may opt for that. And we're looking at resources and how to manage that kind of option. So as we get closer, we will certainly be reaching out and giving options to parents. But it was a way for us, at least back in July, to at least get an initial read on what families might be thinking. And that was really important to us as well. And then the comments underneath kind of mirror what was there. A lot of people are patiently waiting to see what the plan is to know if their children are going to return. And again, based on your level, those plans may look a little different. So that was definitely the flavor that was there. A lot of comments about looking to return to normalcy and getting children and students and teachers back together so things can kind of feel at least a little bit normal again. And there was a tremendous amount of 205 responses there. I'd say there was probably 70 or 80 that were in that vein of, can we get them back? Keep in mind, this survey was done in the month of July, and we know that guidance is changing and forthcoming. So this was at the time where people were as they were thinking. So the common reopening plans, we were just curious to see what people's initial read was. What would be your most preferred, what would be your most preferred method of instruction in the fall? And it was very general again, but blue was in person and most preferred. The second choice was a hybrid model. And then the third choice was the remote model. So as you're looking at this particular graph, the most preferred was to come back to in-person instruction, and then remote instruction was the least preferred method. So it kind of fell, knowing that the plans were not fleshed out and things were very general, it kind of fell the way that we expected it in terms of choice of preferences there, with the little variations as you look through with that. And again, those comments that you see there was 151 of them. A lot of them talked about the need for the enhanced, if we're doing remote learning, we need to have a more rigorous approach to that. If we were going back into a more normal setting, what would be the restrictions? What would be kind of the mandates that would need to be in place around safety and other precautions? And then hybrid was, the basic thought was, or the basic responses were, what does a hybrid look like? You know, how does it fit with my child and their particular level? So again, we had about 151 responses. So again, I realize I'm going through this very quickly and giving you flavors of responses or comments from that. So we did ask a question that was directly related to the hybrid schedule. And at the time, there were two basic schedules hybrid that were being floated back in July. One of the versions was that you would have a half-day session. So students would basically go, one group would go in the morning, leave to go home, and another group would come in the afternoon. So you'd be looking at roughly about three hours or so of instruction per group, one in the morning and one in the afternoon. That has huge transportation ramifications, and we also realize that those have big ramifications for childcare, especially if you've got little ones. But again, it was a way for us to get a flavor for it. The other most common hybrid model was that of alternating days. Go on Monday and Tuesday, and then again on Thursday and Friday. I'm just using that as an example, or potentially going Tuesday and Thursday, Wednesday and Friday, something like that. And again, there are pros and cons to go along with that. We got a lot of comments in the comments section about that, and about asking about how to manage transportation and childcare. Again, those were the two things that kind of came to the surface. And again, there was a lot of comments about safety. How do you ensure safety of my child, of our students in those kind of hybrid systems with so many people kind of coming and going each day as you went through. The next question that we had asked was, if we need to continue remote learning or hybrid learning in the fall, do you anticipate childcare issues when the instruction is not in person? And we got I say resounding, the graph is a little misleading. It said almost 56% said, no, I don't think I'll have an issue. But when you look at 16%, almost 17%, and 27% or 27.5%, that was either, yes, I'm going to have issues, or I'm not sure at that time. Obviously, that number goes up to near 45%. So that is something as a district we need to keep an eye on, knowing that. And then in the comments section, people explained a lot of their own personal situations about family schedules and who was available when, and that kind of thing. So even though, again, it came in at 56%, we're still looking at about 44% potentially having childcare issues. So it is something that we are paying attention to, as I just mentioned. I just mentioned it, transportation is a pretty big issue in our school system. So if the school buses were to operate in the fall, what was your family thinking? So I'll give you some color codes here to be able to give you a frame of reference. The blue at 27 was, I plan to use the district transportation. My child's gonna be getting on a bus. The red at 29.3% said that you may use the transportation, but you need to know what that's going to look like at the district level. So one of the common questions that came out of that was, so are they going to have to wear a mask? Can we sit together as a family? How long, are the bus rides going to be the same? How many kids are going to be on a bus? Those kinds of questions came through. Then there was about 30.5%, and it's that yellow color, that said they plan to transport their own child. And then we had 8% that said that they either walk or they can transport themselves. Think junior and seniors in high school. A lot of those students are getting their license or have their license. So that 8% kind of accounts a little bit for that as well. And then the little piece that's white here, there was a whole bunch of different kind of individualized responses that were put in there around busing. And again, in the comment section, we heard about transportation to daycares, transportation to sitters, transportation among split families, were a lot of the flavor of those kind of comments going forward. So those are all challenges we're going to have to pay attention to going forward. If the district limits the number of students on a bus, and it means less than full return to school, given the limited number of students on a bus, what was your plan? So again, the guidance from the Department of Education and the CDC around buses has not been released yet. Worst case scenario, it was talked about of having only 13 students on a bus, basically one every other seat. Not sure that's really viable. And then there were other talk of you could put two in a seat wearing a mask together. And again, that would get you closer to the capacity of a bus. But one of the requirements that DOE has really been strict with us on is the idea that the governor's orders limit the number of people that can be grouped together in one space. And they said a bus is counted as one space, so you need to be below 50 on that bus. But again, the guidance has not been released. So we were trying to get a read on what would that mean? Would that change your transportation needs going forward? So the blue that you see there, 14.3%, I need the bus no matter what happens. And then red at 31.4%, they would choose to transport their child both ways, both to and from school. The yellow, I could only transport to school. Basically in the morning, I could only transport to school in the morning. The green, I would only transport back home. The purple, their transportation is going to be a barrier for us for whatever reason, and that was explained in the comments. And a lot of that had to do with private roads and things like that. Again, split families having to be in different towns, et cetera. So those comments were very helpful to us as we went forward. Then the kind of bluish turquoise, 21.4%. I'm really not sure what I'm going to do right now. And then we had that 20.6%, which is kind of a pink color, that said, I don't have any concerns about transportation. Whatever you run is what I'm going to do. So that just gave us a flavor of what that might look like for us. And I am going to say, as we're here right now, transportation is one of those areas I have very big concerns around moving forward. And we, as superintendents, are all waiting to get guidance from the DOE about what will be acceptable on buses and what the trips may look like. And again, we're still waiting on that guidance, but we have to do some planning in the meantime going forward. The next question, please indicate how important the following precautions were to you in order to make the students and staff safe in the return to buildings. So as you're looking at these, the blue line was very important, the red line was somewhat important, and the yellow line was not important. This doesn't really affect me too much. So things like the school, the cleaning that's happening of the school, that's very important to people. This one that you see here is about face coverings, and we all know that face coverings is a hot button topic. We'll talk about that a little bit more later at the end of the presentation, but you can see how it splits out when you get to those hot button topics like face coverings. This was also a face covering around staff wearing it. And this one was about social distancing. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about social distancing a little bit later in the frequently asked questions, but it did seem to be important to a lot of people. Hand hygiene, which is the science behind it. Will we have, soap and water or hand sanitizer or wipies of some kind to be able to make sure we have a hand hygiene program to keep people safe and use it consistently as well was very important. Again, the hand sanitizer in each classroom used frequently. Visitors and volunteers limited in the building, and that continues to be some of the guidance from the DOE is as we plan for reopening that the traffic in the building be limited to the teachers and the students as much as possible going forward. The number of students in class being reduced through an alternate schedule is a very specific question. Again, because it's more of a hot button topic, you can see the spread. The lines aren't far apart, they're very close together. So that gives us that, perspective that it is a hot button topic. This one was interesting. Students only interact with those in their classes. And I know the schools are social places. So again, we understand that this is probably going to be one of those hot topics and that we are going to need to account for that going forward and as we set up our schools to be ready for students to return. Materials being shared or cleaned between student use was very important to people. Buses running at smaller capacity. Again, you can see that there's a very good split here. So transportation, what that says to me is transportation is something that we can work out based on the responses that are here. It would not affect a decision. So that was really interesting and good information to have moving forward. Bus drivers wearing face coverings was the next one. Food service wearing face coverings. Again, food service, I talked just very quickly and give them a couple of kudos here. They were doing this well before COVID-19 started. They had pretty stringent requirements. So the only new piece is really the mask piece for food service. And then we have a fantastic food service staff. So that helps us for sure going forward. And then the last couple are about social distancing, the 3 to 6 feet maintained between students. And then again, this one is between students and teaching staff. So again, you can see the bars are closer together. So we realize that is a little bit more of a hot button topic that we need to figure out going forward. Lots of responses around this. A lot of comments about cleanliness and what are the protocols for cleaning. A lot of comments around that. That was very clear going forward. There were comments about masks in here as well, and of course about social distancing. Those were the kind of the hot button discussion topics at this particular juncture. So we did decide to ask the question, I would feel safer for my child to attend school if, and then ask people to check or add their own as you go through. So the one that came out, I'll kind of jump around on this one, but the one that came out at the top at 50%, which was important to people, was what are the social distancing plans going to be around that. The guidance at the time was 6 feet, and what is that going to look like for our children in school? The next one up was the wearing of masks, and this one was specific to staff. And then as you go over, the next one was class sizes being reduced through a staggered schedule, and then masks for students from there. And then the last couple were if we have to continue to operate remotely, are we prepared to do so? Are we going to have a stronger, enhanced remote learning? And then the none of the above, there was 150. So there's a lot of other comments that were put in about that or in the other category. And then this is the way they broke it out going forward. So lots of information there. And then again, comments that basically echoed the other ones that were written up there. There was questions about temperatures. As I just quickly look at that, that one jumped out. Taking temperatures and protocols before you go to school. What is that going to look like? How do we know someone is healthy before they come in? We'll talk about that a little bit later in the frequently asked questions. At the time in July, we had the DOE had not come out and mandated masks. So we did ask a question that if we are required to use masks, would you be supplying your own masks to your children? Would you expect the school system to supply the masks, or do you need help supplying masks? So 79% had said that they would supply their own. And then the other two categories, the yellow is I expect the school system to provide it. And then I may be able to provide it in red, but I may have situations where I need the school to supplement masks for whatever reason. So that was back in July. We'll talk a little bit very quickly about masks in the frequently asked questions session, or section, excuse me. What are some ways you can help understand the precautions that are being taken? The one that stands out the most, and again, we will talk about it at the frequently asked section, excuse me, is communication about a positive case, whether it's staff or student, how are you going to communicate out any kind of positive cases? So that was another question that was asked as well. Then the next one up was educational sessions about procedures that will be put into place in the schools. And we've already started as an administrative team to look to put those together because that is going to be very important. And then we had a few others, a parental support group, discussions with our school nurse or other healthcare providers, and links to resources going forward. We did ask about home learning and the space that you might have. Do you have a workspace? Do they have basic supplies? Do you need reading materials that are on grade level? Do you not have access to anything and would need some help with those comments? We got a lot of the comments in this particular session talked about reading materials being on grade level and such, and I thought that was a very appropriate. Home libraries sometimes, especially if you're building a home library, you may be missing age-appropriate reading materials. So I thought that was a really interesting comment, and I'm glad we asked it because I think it gives us a perspective if we have to go into remote learning about what materials students are going to need. And reading is the key to learning, so we want to make sure they have what they need. We did ask the question, is your child excited to return to school? It was very nice for us to see that 80% were excited. Our staff and the people who looked at that made people smile to see this particular one, which is really nice. Yes, there are 20% that are anxious to come back to school, but that is why we had a committee that was about social emotional learning and well-being. So we know that there's going to be a core of our students that are going to need a lot of support to get them back excited about coming back to school. So this one was really, really nice. The comments down at the bottom reflected that 80% of students missing their friends and wanting to get back to school, and not just their friends, but their teachers as well, and really missing school during that sudden shutdown in March. So it was nice to read that and to know that that our goal going into this was to make sure that we could bring students, as many students back as safely as possible in the fall. So to see that kind of let us know that we were on the right track in terms of trying to get as many students back to school as we could. And then what's your biggest concern? You can see we got 730 responses here, and it mirrors a lot of what I've already said, so I'm not going to dwell here very long. Safety was the big thing, and communication was the other thing that kind of came out with that. So you can see just on the surface, but there was 730 responses, so it was pretty powerful. One of the other ones that came out from there was communication, but also communication if someone is sick or is identified as having COVID-19. What is that going to look like in the school? So that was those were kind of the comments that were there. And then we had 171 questions submitted through this survey. So we did go through, and like I said, I have about 10 of them at the end of the program that I'll try to share as much as possible with you on that. So having said that, I know I went through that very quickly, and that took me 35 minutes, which was about 10 minutes longer than I intended to take. So what I'm going to do now is I am going to let go of the screen. And what we're going to do is I'm going to ask my committee leads one at a time to unmute themselves, and they're going to give a short report out of some of the work that they did around these topics going forward. So what I'm going to do is go in order. So Miss Tina Brackley, if you don't mind going first, she was Pillar 1. She worked with a group of about 10 or 12, and I'll let you talk with that, about 10 or 12 people, food service, transportation, and what am I missing? Food service and facilities. I apologize. So I'm going to mute myself for a few minutes.
Good evening, everyone. So the Pillar 1 Basic Needs Committee looked at the main DOE framework, and we used Part 1, which talks about physical health and safety. A lot of this eventually came down to the state did give us some guidelines around some of it that has to be implemented. We looked at personal protective equipment, and it had discussions around what that would look like in schools. We discussed hygiene practices in schools and how they could be implemented. We looked at our facilities and the needs of our facilities and how we could ensure that they could be as safe as we could get them. So different things that will need to be in place in schools, such as plexiglass and signage. And a lot of this follows the recommendation guidelines that was given in the DOE framework, as well as some of the guidelines from the CDC. We also then looked at our food services and how we could best provide lunch safely. A lot of work will be done based on the recommendations of the committee on how to feed kids in class, in schools safely. And we do have certain guidelines that we have to follow around the National School Lunch Program once school starts. So those will also be implemented. And then we talked about transportation and the capacity of buses. And there's, as Jay said earlier, there hasn't been a lot of guidance or updates around guidance around buses. So we talked about what we could do and what we could do safely. And the committee ultimately came up with a checklist of recommendations to move forward with.
Thank you, Tina. I'll talk about it after. I'll turn it over to Diane next to talk about, she was kind of the pillar 2, and it was about technology, devices, and connectivity. So I'll throw it over to Diane.
Hi. So my group was looking at what we have for devices already and what our needs were. We were looking at not only devices of how they were working and connectivity. We were using Khajiits in the spring, which are mobile hotspots that use a cellular signal. We explored lots of options for connectivity. And knowing that connectivity is a problem that's sometimes bigger than what the school can handle, because sometimes you just don't get a cell signal at your house, or like you maybe want to have cable internet, but spectrum does not go up your road, or things like that. So just trying to get as creative as we could with connectivity. We also talked a lot about learning management systems, which help to deliver content remotely or in a hybrid model, and the training that would be around those for not only students and staff, but also parents, so that the parents could help support students in those settings. And just general PD needs around professional development needs around technology in this new learning situation. So those are the areas that my committee worked on.
Thank you very much, Diane. Can I go to Dr. Kristen Levac next? She worked on, or she led, excuse me, Pillar 3 around social emotional learning and well-being, and that was targeted both at students and staff as we work together in school. So I'll turn it over to Kristen.
Hi, everyone. So our pillar was comprised of 7 elementary staff, 4 middle school staff, 3 high school staff, 5 district staff, and 2 board members. Over the course of our time together, we reviewed many social emotional resources before deciding on our primary reference, which was called CASEL. It's an acronym for Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. The definition for social emotional learning, also known as SEL, comes from CASEL, and it's the process through which children and adults understand and manage emotions, set and achieve positive goals, feel and show empathy for others, establish and maintain positive relationships, and make responsible decisions. The committee focused its work around the 4 critical practices of SEL, which are number 1, take time to cultivate and deepen relationships, build partnerships, and plan for SEL. Critical practice 2, design opportunities where students can connect, heal, and build their capacity to support students. Critical practice 3, create a safe, supportive, and equitable learning environment that promotes all students' social and emotional development. And critical practice 4, which is use data as an opportunity to share power, deepen relationships, and continuously improve support for students, families, and staff. So from these critical practices, we identified the resources, the essential actions, and the staff professional development that would be needed and conducted in order to support our students and our school community as we prepare for this upcoming school year. Some of the resources that we came up with were a tiered plan for how to make sure that we're focusing on everyone's SEL needs. There are going to be many emotions when school starts back up, and providing support to help students and staff with these will help everyone to feel safer, more comfortable, and be more prepared to learn. We also are in the final phases of identifying our SEL curriculum that will be integrated into classes and to the advisee system for the middle and the high school. We developed a decision-making flowchart that can be used to help provide community and staff with the visual and understanding the steps that are being taken before any major decision is being made during these times. For essential actions, we identified the need to have a social emotional curriculum at all grade levels, which, as I mentioned above, will be integrated into the school day by teachers and advisors. We developed a procedure for staff to follow in the event of any student or staff member who is experiencing emotional distress in order to make sure that they get the help that they need. And we identified the critical activities that should happen at each grade level to help with the transition from summertime to school time. These activities start right before school will begin and will continue throughout the school year. And finally, we generated a list of professional development needs that staff will benefit from for this upcoming school year that will be focused on SEL. Finally, I just wanted to acknowledge my committee. They worked incredibly hard, and I want to just thank all of them because I think some of them are here tonight. So.
Thank you very much, Kristen. The next committee that worked was led by Jeff Boston, and he's here with us tonight, and he will talk a little bit about the academic, we called it academic recovery / plan pillar. So Mr. Boston, I'll turn it over to you next. Is he here? I know he was at his camp, so the connection may be really dicey for him.
Good evening.
Okay.
Yeah, my screen just froze temporarily. I apologize for that. And hopefully it doesn't freeze anymore. Good evening, everybody. I was fortunate enough to work with a great group of 24 educators from various levels, from the elementary, middle, high school, and district administrators. And basically, we took a look at what DOE was requiring and where we needed to go, realizing that while we did some things in the spring that might have been good, we couldn't continue with that, and we had to think outside the box. We realized that there was a balance that we needed to find between instructing kids if they're at home, but also adding rigor and continuing learning. So we, as I said before, we use the DOE model as a guide. It was a little ambiguous. So what we ended up doing is we also took a look at a couple of other state plans that added a little clarity, and those were the Connecticut plan for reopening as well as the Michigan one. We also realized that if we have to go to a hybrid or a remote type of model, it's really important to define sort of the roles of the stakeholders so we can all work together to support the children of RSU 38. So we added some language around what teachers would do, administrators would do, what students would do, as well as parents. We also put in a section in our plan defining what synchronous and asynchronous learning is and looks like. And then what we did is we took a look at each level what in-class instruction is, what hybrid will look like, and what remote will look like as well. And then what we ended up doing is toward the end of our document is having like a glossary of terms, because we realized some of the educational jargon can get confusing if you're hearing or reading it. And we wanted to make sure that if we are in a remote type of situation, that we are educational partners and helping each other out. But the several big items that we wanted to work on was rigor in those remote type of situations, communication with parents, and making sure that we are, even if we're in a remote, we're in touch with students on a regular basis and tracking growth. So that was it from my committee.
Thank you very much, Jeff. That was a very quick summary from Jeff there, but they did an amazing amount of work. All of these committees gave up time over the summer to come in and work on these things. A very dedicated group of people to work on this. And even though we're just giving a short summary right now, there is lots and lots of work and other information that is going to be coming out over the course of the next week or two that will make a lot more sense to you. But wanted to give everyone a flavor that we have been doing some work, and that a lot of different people have been involved in crafting the plans and putting things together, which I think is really important going forward. So this last roughly 10 minutes, what I'd like to do is run through my roughly 10 question, kind of frequently asked questions that came up through the course of the survey. And I did get a couple of questions in today that I'd like to just kind of cover. So again, going back to the beginning here, when we started this work way back in June, knowing that at some point we were going to be reopening, my administrative team came up with a goal. We thought the only way to direct this work is to have a goal to start with. So I'm going to read you the complete goal that we had shared with the school board. Was that our goal for the fall is to safely bring back as many students as possible to in-person settings to maximize learning as well as address our students' holistic needs. Our work was framed around that goal, and it was the work that these leads did was based on kind of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You got to take care of your basic needs first. That was pillar one. You need to, because we know there could be a lot of variation depending on how this pandemic all plays out, where we could be in person, partly remote, or all remote. We knew that connectivity and devices had to be part of those basic needs moving forward. Then, in order to be able to focus on academics, you have to feel safe. And the work that Dr. Levac did with her team is critical to the mission of what we do here at Maranacook and across RSU 38 at our elementary schools, our middle school, our high school. It's about building relationships. We have a very strong foundation in that, but we wanted to make it a little bit more transparent and give teachers more tools and more strategies going into this year, because we knew it was going to be more important than ever. We have a strong tradition of that, but we wanted to make it even stronger and support our students and our staff going forward to build those relationships. So then, as Mr. Boston talked about, then we can start to focus on the academic part of the school year. So it's kind of like rebuilding the culture of the school again around those basic needs. So we started with that goal. So I just wanted to share that to start off the questions. The next thing I'm going to do is we talked several times about Maine DOE and their responsibility in this. So what I'd like to do is I'm going to again share my screen, and I'm going to throw up the framework just as we're not going to go through it all because it's amazingly long, it's amazingly thick, but at the same time I'd like people to see that we were working with DOE and they are giving us guidance around that. So hang on just one second. And this also, so this framework can be found at maine.gov/DOE/framework, very simple. And if you scroll down the page, you will see that even the Department of Education looks at this as a working draft. They continue to update this almost weekly, and in some cases it seemed like it was daily updates. So in their framework, they came out not too long ago and said, we have 6 things that schools must have in place in order to open in the fall. If these 6 things are not in place, you cannot open to in-person instruction. These are not negotiable for us. There is reporting requirements and such that are tied to these things. So I just wanted to be clear because there's questions about masks, about social distancing, why we're doing some of the things we're doing. So here are the 6 requirements, and this does answer some of the questions, actually quite a few of the questions. So one thing that we have to have in place is a symptom screener, which will be done at home with families. And this is a screener for both students and staff. And it's going to be a self-reporting checklist. We have some ideas on how we're going to roll this out and what we're going to use. Not going to get into the specifics of that here tonight, but you do have to have a screener of some kind there. People have been asking a lot about temperatures. There is no requirement in the screener, right or wrong. There is no requirement to check temperatures as a self-check. Obviously, it would be a great thing if people would do that, but there's no requirement in that self-check to report out what my temperature is daily. The next thing is the social distancing piece around, I apologize, you guys. I don't know why it did that. It just flipped screen on me. So physical distancing, adults have to maintain 6 feet of distance from others, including students. Maintaining 3 feet, and again, this comes from DOE, maintaining a distance of 3 feet between and among students combined with other measures, which is going to be hand washing, face coverings, etc., is acceptable. So DOE has come out and said, you can be as close as 3 feet. 6 feet is the ideal, obviously. If you're wearing a mask, if you're going through the other protocols, then 3 feet in a school is acceptable. Again, agree or disagree, that's the guidance we're getting from DOE, is that 3 to 6 measure. The other thing that goes along with that is we must have a medical isolation room in every building. It's got to be separate from the nurse, and it's for any student or staff who may be exhibiting COVID-19 symptoms during the course of the school day. It's got to have ventilation. We've got to have access to PPE, personal protective equipment. And we have to be aware of the governor's order as part of this physical distancing, medical isolation, that the max right now in any one space is 50 people. So that's students and adults together when you count can't be more than 50. So that was part of what DOE is kind of putting out as a requirement. Face coverings was updated on July 31st, so this is fairly new, but it is saying that students age 5 and above are required to wear their face mask and covering that covers their nose and their mouth. The update that came out does say that children between 2 and 4, it's recommended, but it's not going to be mandatory for that. And again, that in a school setting, we're really talking about pre-K in that particular instance is where those students would fall. So we have a group that is looking at how are we going to do that for pre-K and be able to run that program in a way that still honors what pre-K is all about. And we know what that is. There is exceptions to the face mask coverings. If you have medical, behavioral, or other challenges or unable to wear a mask, you can use a shield to do that. We do have supplies. We have stockpiled masks at school, and we will have them available for anyone who needs them, and that includes the face shields as well. Buses, they are saying you must have face coverings at all times while you're on the buses. So that was, again, something that's mandatory. We don't have a choice in that matter. DOE is kind of dictating that for us. Hand washing, hand hygiene, and I know a lot of people are already doing this. If you're like my family, you suddenly realize all the things you touch and how many times you need to wash your hands. And I'm sure that's very similar in your household as well. But we do have to have proper hand hygiene supplies and procedures in place for hand hygiene going forward. We also need to have an adequate supply of personal protective equipment. That includes not just teachers, but also for nurses should there be COVID-19 positive cases. So we were able to get some to start with, and DOE is providing us more, but we have to have those supplies with us before school can start. And I am confident right now we're going to be in a very good place when it comes to protective equipment by the time school starts in the fall here. And then we have to have a return to school after illness plan for staff members and students. And again, we use the CDC guidelines to help us with that around quarantining, testing, etc. So those are all things we have to have in place before we can even talk about opening a school. If we get bogged down in such things as face coverings, then we are going to be looking at starting the year remotely. So our goal is to get people here. It's a new normal, and I know people have heard that endlessly, and it does get a little bit old, but at the same time, we are gearing ourselves up to get our students back, and we're going to follow those guidelines that DOE is putting out for us, because there are reporting requirements, there are financial considerations if we are not doing these things. So there are a few things that are out of our hands, and that covered about 4 of my 5 questions. I do want to be cognizant of time. It is 7:31. There are a few more that I think that are important that I'd like to get through, but I also understand if people have to leave the meeting for whatever reason. So the next important one that I'm going to jump over to, I'm going to stop sharing, change the screen, and I'd like to talk a little bit about what do we do if we have a staff member or student who we think is COVID-19 positive. What are the steps that go along with that? Again, I'm using the CDC. That's what we have to rely on. But I'd like to talk you through very quickly a small piece of that as well. So hold on just a sec. I'm going to shuffle a few things on my own screen here. So if there is a confirmed case in a school, we have to call CDC right from the get-go. Obviously, we are going to isolate that student. We are going to get in contact with the parents. We're going to be asking you to pick up the the child as soon as possible and to get to your primary care physician. That's priority number one, is we're going to take care of that particular student. But the very next thing that's going to happen, and a lot of this is going to happen simultaneously, is that we are going to be contacting CDC. CDC is going, they do have a roadmap. They are going to tell us kind of what we are going to do. It's going to depend, it is a little bit situational dependent. Is it right at the start of the day? Is it at the end of the day? Is it in the middle of the day? That's going to determine a lot of things. It's very possible that it's going to look a little different, but we will contact CDC. They will help guide us through the process and the step-by-step. What do we do next piece? But if you do go to the CDC website, they have a generalized map of what could potentially happen: dismissing students and staff, deep cleaning the buildings, being out anywhere from 2 to 5 days, potentially longer depending on the situation, and if there is any kind of spread that goes on with that. If that would be the case, we would flip right into remote learning. Again, we are a very widespread district when you think about our 4 towns and what comes together. It is very possible, and again, I'm just, again, we're just talking theoreticals right now. It is very possible that there would be a case at the high school and the high school would shut down, but the other schools might stay open. It's going to be a little bit situational dependent. We are going to, as soon as we know what's going on, we are going to be communicating with parents, students, parents, and families about what's going on. Please be aware that this is a small town, small towns in Maine, but we do have to maintain confidentiality. We can't say, Jay Charette at Maranacook Middle School has COVID-19, so we're shutting down. We can't say that. We won't be able to give out names, but we are also aware that it is Maine small towns. Everyone knows everybody, and usually the word gets out pretty quick. And we're going to hope people will respect families' confidentiality and not blow things up on social media feeds and such. That's going to be really important going forward. But again, we will communicate with families if there's any positive cases. In order to get back, obviously we have to do some cleaning and thorough disinfecting, and there's a whole list. I'm not going to try to read it to you right now. It is very prescriptive in that respect. And then we will have discussions about how long school might be closed, how much how much contact there was. We might have to do some contact tracing and call specific students and families to let you know, so that you, again, can go and get your child tested or quarantined if you feel like they've been exposed. As far as returning to it, if it's a positive case, we're going to be waiting for a negative test to come back before that student or staff member would be coming back to school. So that could be anywhere from 10 to 14 days or potentially longer, depending on the severity of the illness with COVID-19. So that's the general roadmap of what it's going to look like. And again, we would probably flip into remote learning, and we would want to make sure education is still happening. We'd still be looking at food service for those people that need it. All those kinds of things as we go through. So that's kind of the general CDC roadmap that we would be using. We will be a little bit more specific with that, but that would be the general time frame. Take care of the student, get them connected with their families, and then figure out what we need to do, contact CDC, start the cleaning process, and start the communication process with families of students who might have come in contact with that. So I know a lot of you guys have heard about contact tracing, and in schools, because we will be limiting visitors and stuff, it is going to be a lot easier to be able to do that and reach out directly to families when there's suspected, excuse me, cases going forward. So it's all about communication and making sure that families have the information they need to make the best choices for themselves. I do want to, I'm going to jump to another question. That was a really big question. I'm going to jump to a couple more kind of short and sweet ones and then wrap up. So there have been questions about sports, especially at the high school level. You see, kids in groups doing conditioning work and stuff. They're not wearing masks. The MPA, the Maine Principals Association, controls athletics in our state, and we've made the commitment to follow their guidelines when it comes to sports training, sports practices, and sporting events. So we will follow that guidance, and they are using, again, best science when it comes to how to do that. We know that sports plays an integral role here at Maranacook. So our goal is to we're going to follow those MPA guidelines, make sure we're doing sports safely within the guidelines that we have. Another question was asked about the arts. And the question was very simple. Are we going to lose the arts? The answer is no. Those things may have to look a little different this year. We may have to think a little different about that, but we are still committed at Maranacook to the arts. We're not going to lose the arts from the elementary schools right up into the high school. We're going to figure that out and make sure our students have access to those. We have a rich tradition of that here, and we're going to continue that for sure going forward. So last, and I apologize, I am skipping a couple of questions, but the last thing I'd like to let you guys know is that we have spent, like I said, started this process back in June. We are at a point where we are putting the finishing touches and working out some final details on our district level plan. We will be going to the school board on August 12th for approval of this plan. As soon as we have approval, we will then get it out Thursday morning. We will get it out, and then schools, individual schools, will have some work to do under that plan. There has to be some flexibility for the schools to be able to do what they need to across those different levels. So we're going to have the district level plan at a school board meeting August 12th, which is next Wednesday at 6 p.m. The board, unless I get different direction, they are in favor of doing in-person meetings. So unfortunately, that means that if anyone shows up, we're going to have limited seating because there can only be up to 50 there. We have 12 board members plus myself, and then administrators will be there as well. So it will be kind of limited unless we can potentially do a Zoom kind of meeting at the board level. We don't have the capability to be able to broadcast it or live stream it. So that is a little bit of a challenge where we're going to try to work through. But again, the board could make a decision to go totally remote or virtual with this particular meeting to be able to allow people access. But just so people know right from the get-go, I want to be very transparent about that. It's at the middle school, in the cafeteria of the middle school is where we will be. And we will present the plan. It's a special meeting, so there's only 3 things on the agenda. One is the plan. The other one is some Title IX policies. Sorry, I'm going to bore people, but Title IX policies. And then ratification of a bus driver contract is the last thing that will happen at that special meeting. But just so people know, we are going to get information out as quickly as we can. We know it has been that families have had a lot of questions about what's happening in the fall, and that's kind of the $1 million question. But we are very close to being able to have an answer so families and schools can be ready and can make some decisions moving forward and get our students back and get back to what school is supposed to be. It will look a little different, but the goal is to try to get students back from there. So having shared all of that, it is now 7:42. We will more than likely be scheduling another Zoom meeting in the coming weeks to talk more about the plans, and we will be gathering questions to be able to work with this. So I appreciate the audience that we had. We were at one point up to 145-ish people, which is simply amazing. And I know that people want to know what's going on, and we are very close to having those answers for you. And we look forward to the fall coming. So thank you everyone for being here tonight. I'm going to let everyone go. Thank you very much, and we will be talking again in the very near future. Good night, everyone.